this is the time where we get to hear from you. We get some of your thoughts, some of your questions, some of your comments, concerns, you name it. I find this story to be quite interesting. The time where we get to hear from you. We get testing and make sure I'm good. All right. I'm working on a little technical issue here. So give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me okay? All right. Good deal. Good deal. So anyway, so the story as we have it, you saw the wonderful demonstration, the audio file, that the video that Seth put together. That was awesome. I think everybody enjoyed that. But I want you to spend some time this week to really look through this document that I put together, because I think it does a good job of laying out some things that would promote a deeper discussion about the subject of the sources, and you have all sorts of different questions that come up with this. So you can ask your questions based on the document. I hope that everyone saw the document. I mentioned it during the class. It is there is a link to this document called The Narrative of the 12 Tribes, a Horizontal Study. There's a link to it in the description of the video from this morning's class. So hopefully you have that. If you don't have it, you can slide over there, click open the document, and then you'll have it. So anyway, what are some of your questions and comments? I've always enjoyed this particular story, the details about this story, and have been even in the wilderness in some of these locations and thought about the details of this story. Brother Dave Tyler.
Hey, a little fuzzy there today because I tape over my I don't know what's going on. I tape over my camera because I just don't trust it. It's very simple. God tells you to do something, you do it. He's the creator of the universe, and I don't feel even that I would question him. Maybe like Abraham knew that he had to go sacrifice Isaac or whatever. There's a lot of discussions about that, but to say I know better than God is kind of what I felt from some of the other 10. The other thing that's really good is Seth put it in terms of today, thumbs ups and thumbs down. I love that, and I just want to let you know that I think we're going in the right direction, and the camera quality is just continues to be outstanding. And like I say, I do what God asks, and I don't question. I contemplate. I think about it. I don't question God when bad things happen, and I don't question God when good things happen. I just say thank you, or please help me get through this. And it's like the old Christian statement: if God told me to go to the gates of hell, I would. And so I don't understand why people think they can outthink God. There's no way you can do that. That's all I'm saying. You're muted, Ross.
All right, I'm back. Forgive me. I've had personal issues trying to get everything straight on my end. Poor Seth has got to babysit me every week. Hey, appreciate your comments, Dave. Todd and Angel.
Shabbat Shalom. Kind of add on to what Dave was talking about right there. We were discussing earlier during a lesson of the same thing. God tells you to do something, you do it. And what really blows your mind is to think that if you're there to witness all this stuff, you're witnessing the 10 plagues, you're witnessing the part in the Red Sea, everything that's going on. Me personally, I couldn't be rebellious like that. I couldn't be questioning like that. I mean, if I saw that stuff, it's like, you got me. Whatever you say, I'll do it.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. I would say it doesn't make sense, but I mean, because people are people. We see it every day. But for a whole nation to get like that, it's just...
It is rather surprising. I mean, you would think that, like you said, people who witness these miracles would be a little better behaved, right?
Yeah.
I swear. I don't know.
It is what it is.
Yeah. Well, specific to the spy story, um, you have any comments or insights on the particulars of, I brought up when you look at Deuteronomy 1, you look at Numbers 13, you look at those side by side, it does appear that they're based on different sources. Do you see that?
Yeah.
You think I'm making more of it than?
I don't think so. I mean, it definitely seems like it's from two different sources.
Yeah.
And something else I think is interesting too. You might have heard of this also. Supposedly, the reason so many, or you had 10 against 2, basically, when they come back saying, we ain't going over there, this, that, and the other. Apparently, they were giants they actually saw over there, which is one of the reasons they said we look like grasshoppers to them.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point too. And I didn't bring it up in this class, but I have in other classes where I've talked about this. One of the things that we see is that they say they begin to recognize what the other people see. In other words, they said we were in their eyes as grasshoppers. And I think that's problematic because you don't know what you are in someone else's eyes. So that's going too far with the fear. It demonstrates that they're clearly scared. I mean, they're, and I think that's part of the problem in this story too. Again, not only are they trusting their own eyes, which is leading them astray, but they're, in addition to that, they're trusting the eyes of people that they can't see through. I mean, that's even worse in my view,
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Anything else?
That's it.
All right, well, stay tuned. Karen, how are you? Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, I'm good.
What you thinking today? What are your thoughts? What are your insights?
I got 7 pages of notes here, Ross. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let me get my pen out.
Okay. So, first thing I want to ask is, why is it in Deuteronomy, it says they sent the spies out from the wilderness of Zin?
Yep.
But in Numbers, they're going from the wilderness of Paran.
Yep. That is one of the cases. I didn't get into all of the details that cause those who really look at this to see the different disparate sources, but you bring up one of the classic examples. So what the apologist will say, Karen, to that is, well, the wilderness of Zin and the wilderness of Paran, it's really talking about the same place, and they'll try to wash over that, but it's clearly not talking about the same place. The wilderness of, we know those are fairly certainly identified. The wilderness of Sin is directly below the Dead Sea and slightly to the west, and the wilderness of Paran is slightly south of the wilderness of Sin. And we have a wadi that separates the two, so they're not the same. And what scholars have come to, if you look at, again, this document can be very valuable because what it does is it shows that the priestly source, which is blue in my document, and the J source, which is green in my document, and the Deuteronomy source, which is black, do tell different stories. And one has them sending the spies. Well, the idea of whose idea it was to send the spies is, first of all, different in the two. Then you have these two spies going from different places. So to answer your question, most certainly there are different sources telling the story, and the details vary between the sources.
Yeah. And then I had another question. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, 13 through 14, it says, and the days in which we came from Kadesh Barnea until we were come over the brook Zered was 38 years.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to read this. I know there's this concept that they leave Sinai, and it's an 11 days journey to Kadesh Barnea, but it takes them 40 years.
Yeah.
Um,
A couple of views. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
But when I was reading up on the, why seen, why Paran, and who's it? The Ramban says that there are two places called Kadesh. They're different. And they live, they were near the one in Paran for 38 years. And then in the last 2 years, they go to the one in Sin, and that's where the waters of Meribah happen, and Miriam dies, and that's where Mount Hor is. I mean, that's his argument, that they are two separate places called the same name.
Yeah, you have that repeated in the wilderness itineraries quite often, and it's what has puzzled these facts that we're talking about here is what had puzzled so many people over the ages. The Rambam, all the way down to people like you and I, because there are difficulties in the text, there are discrepant readings in the text. What we're going to find out, I covered this a couple of years ago, and I think Seth has convinced me as often as we can, we're going to go live on Saturday, and I'm not just pulling out my notes, I'm looking at this material again. But one of the things that I saw on my last time through is that there is the majority of material that's covered in the Pentateuch about the wilderness itinerary is shoved into the first couple of years. And then there's a big bit of it that's at the very end in the 40th year. Now, what we have to do is we assume that the events that we read from Exodus chapter 13, where they really begin to leave Egypt, until the end of Deuteronomy, we imagine that those events that are described in that section of text are spread out evenly over the 40-year wilderness time. But it's not. It's almost all shoved into the first little bit. In fact, I'm going to show that the book of Numbers, up until you get well into chapters past 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, a lot of that stuff happens very early on. And it's a problem for people who think that this chronicles the whole 40. Let me give you an example. So the Passover, we know that according to Exodus 12 and other texts, that the Passover is to be a festival that's to be kept every year in and year out throughout your generations and so forth. But what you find is that, at least according to the narrative of the Pentateuch, primarily Numbers, we only have the one Pesach when they leave Egypt, the original, and then we get year two. Now that year 2 is a big year for them. They leave Sinai. That's where a lot of the battles take place. It's like the scribes or the ones who wrote the story give us a whole bunch of information about those first couple of years. And then you've got this big period of time, like 37, 38 years, that's kind of unaccounted for. And then you get the wrap up. Moses says, I'm 120 years old today. And then he goes back, according to most people's reading of Deuteronomy, and recounts some of that other material and pulls it all together. That's the way people understand it. But because of the text you just read in Deuteronomy chapter 2, it basically says, and a lot of people have read it this way, that the time at Kadesh Barnea is roughly 38 years. So they spend the first year going from Egypt, particularly Goshen, according to the writers. They go to Sinai, Horeb. They get the Torah delivered to them. They spend about a year there, according to the narrative. Now, they're a year and a few months in. Then they go to Kadesh Barnea, where they spend the majority of the rest of the 40 year. So they're not like walking around day in and day out for 40 years. And, it's more of a centralized location. And you brought up some questions about your research last week, talking about Kadesh Barnea. I know you've been looking into that. And this mysterious MBI people Rudy Cohen and some of these archaeologists think they've identified this location, this Kadesh Barnea. So it would be a the picture would be a little bit different. It's like you spend most of the time there instead of 40 years wandering around. You're there almost the whole time.
I have my theory of where Kadesh Barnea is.
Is it different than that one? Where's your thought? Or can you give it away? Or
did he say it's Petra?
Okay, all right.
You say it's Petra.
You think it's Petra, and
No.
Have you read that, or is that just what you came to by your research?
Lots of research, and a lot of people, agree. Even the Ramban agrees that it's Petra. Rashi, Ibn Ezra, they all think it's Petra, and even they think Josephus made an error, because Aramaic Petra Kadesh Barnea is not called Kadesh; it's called something else. Rakesh. It's called Rakesh in Aramaic.
Okay.
And Josephus would have been writing in Aramaic.
Yeah, the first century. Oh, I got you.
Does mention Rakesh.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Aramaic Bible right now, you can go on Bible Hub and you can pull up the Aramaic Bible. It's not going to say Kadesh Barnea. It's going to say Rakesh something else.
Huh. I'll look at that. I've always kind of. Yep. Go ahead.
But one more thing. The Nabateans called it Rakesh. And also there was an inscription at Petra that said Rakesh. But you can't see it anymore because the Jordanians built a bridge and covered it in concrete. So, but there's a lot of evidence that this is Rakesh, aka Kadesh Barnea. There's a stream coming out of a rock. It's right. You can see Mount Hor, where Aaron's buried. This Marianne wants me to spell Rakesh. I think it's just pretty phonetic. Where am I? I have my notes.
Is it Rakesh?
It is. No, where's my photo? Here we go. Oh, sorry. I said Rakesh. I meant Rekem. Rekem.
Okay.
Rekem. And before they would say, oh, there's a gap. There's always this argue of the gap. There's, Neolithic, Chalcolithic, and then there's a Bronze Age, Iron Age gap. And they're finding, Brown University has gone in and done some surveys and some light archaeological digs, and they're finding that there is Bronze Age and there is Iron Age. It's just heavily looted, and Petra has pretty much been inhabited since 7,000 BCE.
Yeah.
And I think continuously. It's hard to tell that because the Nabateans came in and gave everything a facelift. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And when you do that, you wipe out older cultures. And the place floods every year, so it's, moving lots of dirt. And so you're going to struggle to find older stuff because it's stone. Number one, you can't dig under stone.
Right.
But they have been finding early bronze, so that would be Abraham's time, and they're finding Iron Age, that would like late bronze, early iron, and that would be Moses. So as they look, they're starting to find all of this, and it's heavily looted. Better ones have been there forever. And there's really hasn't been a whole lot of archaeological sanctioned digs there. I mean, there are, but not a lot. And it's controlled by certain Bedouin tribes still today. People live there today.
Oh yeah.
The Spring of Moses that they call it has a house, has a building over it. And
here's something interesting. You probably know this, but so if you go when we go together on tour, you'll see this up close and personal. West of the rift, there is here's the place where Aaron died. Here's Mount Hor. You cross over, and there's a place where Aaron died and where he was buried. There is a spring of Moses, a spring of Miriam, east and west. There's all of these different. There's at least two of everything. So it's not like you can, you're like, well, where is this at? So now I've come to the conclusion, mainly based on our work. I say like what the Tylers and I have done in particularly, and some other friends who've gone on these different trips with us to investigate. I see a Ronald, that might be Ron Vanderham, but he's been there with us, Tabor, others, and we've really come to know this area in the wilderness of Zin, Tzin, I think, and that's west of the rift, by the way. It's in Israel, not in Jordan. I kind of think that a lot of these sites that have been pushed to the east into Jordan actually took place on the west-hand side, the west side. Now, the reason that people don't want it there is, and it's the same mistake people make, in my view. I know there's some people who love the Saudi Arabia site for Sinai. It's the same reason that people push Sinai there, is because they look at a modern map and they find the ancient world, they think, on a modern map. So for instance, if you look at a map and you see the Sinai Peninsula, people go, oh, there you go. This is the Sinai Peninsula. It's Egypt today. It was therefore Egypt then. And they look at Saudi Arabia today and they read like for instance, they read a reference in Galatians about Arabia, and they go, well, there you go. Here's where Arabia is. So we know that Jebel al-Lawz, for instance, is the Sinai, because, well, the same thing goes for Israel. And let me make this point. So, like, for instance, if you're at what I think could very well be the place, Mount Hor, where Moses dies and is buried, and you're in Israel, people say, well, it can't be in Israel because the children of Israel didn't go into Israel. Well, the property didn't go there. The lines were different in the ancient world. Does that make sense? So, for instance, like when I go to Biblical Tamar and I stay there, that was the southernmost point of Judah in the kingdom of Judah. That was the southernmost point. You couldn't go all the way down. It wasn't, Israel wasn't the same, I guess, property lines back then. So people say, well, it couldn't have happened here. It had to happen east of the rift. So I would suggest, and I'm going to look at, I think I have seen, I can't remember all the sources that put Petra as a potential Kadesh Barnea. I'll tell you what else I've heard, and see if you've heard this. In the book of Revelation, we have some Christian viewers too, but in the book of Revelation, some people think that the dragon chases the woman to a place prepared in the wilderness, and they put that at Petra too. Did you come across that in your studies?
Well, I wasn't studying that.
Yeah, I mean, you typically will find it when you see Petra. It's going to say that some believe that. So,
right. And then the part about it being Ein Mishpat from Genesis. I don't know about that.
The part about what being Ein Mishpat?
Kadesh Barnea.
Okay.
There's in Genesis 14:5-7, when our good King Cheddar, he makes an alliance with some other kings, and he attacks Sodom and Gomorrah and carries off Lot. That time. It also says that he ransacks Ein Mishpat, which is also Kadesh. This it says in verse 7, and they turned back and came to Ein Mishpat, the same as Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites and blah blah blah. So when I'm, trying to find Kadesh Barnea, I'm also looking for Ein Mishpat, an older civilization that may have lived there. However, I mean, I find that story a little bit, I don't know what to think of that, because there is no King Kadur Laomar, or whatever you say his name,
Yep.
in the Elamite kings list. And there is a king in the Elamite kings list who lived during the time of Abraham, who was going around ransacking cities, but his name wasn't Kadur Laomar, whatever you say. His name was.
That's actually pretty close, I think. I'm not looking at the Hebrew, but you're close. You're closer than most.
Let's see. His name was King Datu. He was the king going around. He sacked Ur.
Well, let me say, if your name is Kadarla Amor, if you got this long name, maybe he said, what do I call you? And just call me Datu. Maybe use that for short.
Right? Yeah.
Good stuff. So your research is
Amar. That's his name. Kadur Lag Amar.
Yep. So your research pushes the place to Kadesh to the east of the Jordan Rift. So what I'm proposing, and I can send you, I think Tyler is posting some of the pictures of our research there in the chat, at least on the Zoom meeting. But one of the things is that we know that when the children of Israel, at least according to the narratives that we have in the book of Numbers, we get some indication, particularly from Numbers chapter 20 forward, especially in Numbers 33, which gives a whole list of the locations the children of Israel went. Then in the first few chapters of Deuteronomy, we get some names of places. It struck me, it struck us in our research that, first of all, the route of the tribes as they're moving towards the occupation of the land is more of a northerly route, mid to northerly route, than it is a southerly route. So in other words, people who put Sinai at St. Catherine's, we think that's too far south, particularly as you look at the way the route is described. But one possibility is that the children of Israel, if Kadesh is further west than your research is showing right now, and I'm open for anyone that works, is that they go from, say, a Kadesh, which is about where Rudy Cohen and those guys put it, then they would have gone slightly east into the wilderness of Zin, and then up through what's called the Way of the Atarim. And you can hear that people debate the etymology of that word, but you hear the Tor kind of like our word for spies. And some believe that is, again, some believe this, some believe that, but some think that is the Scorpion's Ascent, which is anciently one of the main routes.
Yeah, I read that in there.
Yeah.
The Scorpion's Ascent.
So, but again, those are debated. Just like you're bringing up a perfectly good candidate, the question is what fits the narrative the best. And I'm certainly, I trust that you dig deeply into these things, so I'm going to look at that. And either way, when we do get to tour again and you go with us, we're going to see both of those spots. So on the ground, you'll be able to go, okay, this site makes sense. So,
right.
Good stuff. All right. Is that it, Karen? Good stuff. Julia, Shabbat Shalom. What's your question, comment, insight? Let us know.
Shabbat Shalom. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly well.
All right. Good afternoon. Okay. I think what I wanted to start out with was that God is always righteous. And if you remember that, then what you're saying seems to merit when you did your horizontal region. Why would God tell them to go spy? Not only is he righteous, but he's all-knowing.
Yeah.
So if he's all-knowing, then there's also a possibility he knows who's in the land. He knows that there may have been some fear. He said, go up and possess the land. He didn't need anybody to spy it out, to seek it out, to do it, because he did already.
Yep.
And my thinking was also, if you go by the premise always that God is righteous, he wouldn't punish them for their fear. My thinking was, if he told them to go up, he knows how big they are. He knows how big the people in the land are. There might be some fear. These are not just a whole bunch of warriors. These are people where they were slaves. So
yeah,
if there would be some fear there, then they come back and say, I'm fearful, I don't want to go. Then he'd punish them. He punished them for their disobedience because he's wanting them to trust in him. I didn't say go spy. I said go up and take the land.
That's right.
I said go up and possess the land.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you think of that, that's also what I think of. And when you were talking about how it seems like everything is kind of in the beginning and then toward the end, but not a lot in the middle. Well, the middle was kind of the consequence. I won't say punishment, the consequence. So the consequence was, this is your punishment for doing what you did, and you all are going to die. So, they didn't have to do a whole lot of walking around, because this was basically a waiting time for the consequences of what you did and for them to die out. So, and also looking at the chat on YouTube, I did want to also bring up the thing so the topic can be put in as well here. If God is the cloud and the pillar and guiding them, why did they need a guide? Why was Hobab told to be there so they could guide them if God was doing the guiding?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
No, that's a great question. I mean, what we get is, and now one theory, one answer, people can come to the conclusion that the research and their prayers lead them to. You know that from working with me. But your question is an excellent question, Julia. It's why would they be looking for another person to guide them if God had already said, I went ahead of you and all you have to do is go in and possess it? Kind of brings us to Todd's point a few minutes ago. It's like, why don't they just obey? Right?
Yeah.
It would go so much better if you would.
Yeah.
What we see is if you look at, now, again, this is a scholarly proposal. What I put together, it shows the different sources. What you'll find is that the different sources have different proposals for what happened. So one source says, Moses says, hey, look, Hobab, you happen to be a guy who is familiar with the desert. How about you be our guide in the desert? And that's what we really want. And we need you, and you can help us because you know the desert. Well, that's one writer's proposal. Another says that's not the way it went down, because the priestly writer says it's always the Ark of the Covenant. Always the Ark of the Covenant. Deuteronomy doesn't even ever mention the Ark of the Covenant except in Deuteronomy 10, and it's a different ark.
Yeah.
Like, if you read Deuteronomy's version of the ark, Moses makes it. If you read the Exodus and Leviticus account and Numbers, you get the priestly material, and you come away with the idea that you had two artisans, right, named Bezalel and Aholiab. They make an ark in it. This is the way it looks. It's got these creatures on the top of. So you get these different stories, and these different stories at times have different solutions to the problems that the text presents. Again, one of the points that I made in the class today that I really wanted people to think about is, and you highlighted that, Julia, is you got this one story in Deuteronomy And it tells us that the people came to Moses and said, hey, let's send some people to scout this place out. And then if you look at the count in Numbers 13, it's not that at all. So again, one has the ark, one has a quest, would Hobab, would you be willing to lead us? And so there are all these different ideas. So
Also,
it's a good, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I thought about it as well. The reason why we also get this story, and what you also referenced, Todd said, why didn't they just obey?
Yeah.
This is what it's trying to show us. Just be obedient. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be fear. It just means that the best thing, God loves us. He's not sending us in some place that's going to kill us. He's not sending us where the only object is to do that.
Yeah.
So he understands that. And when you look at that's animation, you look up the 10 thumbs down, the 2 thumbs up. We're not going to be in the majority. It's not going to be an easy thing. It's not going to be majority, but God knows what's best for us. He loves us.
That's right.
So.
That's right. Hey, good insights. Right. Good insights. Look, I'm going to bring up Tom next, and Tom, go ahead and come on. Thank you, Julia. But before you go, Tom, one point I want to bring up. I see a question on the YouTube that I just want to touch on. Sharon Swanson, hello Sharon, says, I'm wondering why the Septuagint said they were in the wilderness for 42 years instead of 40 years, as all the other accounts say. Excellent question. I brought that up in my class. It's Joshua chapter 5, verse 6, and the Septuagint says that it mentions 42 years in the wilderness. Now, why would that be? One proposal as to why that would be is because the writer of that text is looking at a text which had, because the Septuagint allegedly comes from a translation of Hebrew. And could they have had a text that said 42, whereas the Masoretic text, Hebrew that we now use, had 40 years, which if you open most Bibles today, you'll see 40 years in Joshua chapter 5, verse 6. But here's the other thing. It could be that the person penning the Septuagint said, the math isn't adding up here. And why isn't it adding up? Because we're 2 years into this. I can see somebody saying, we're 2 years into this wilderness journey, and God sentences them to 40 years in the wilderness. Now, is he saying 40 years from right now, 2 years in? And that's what the writer of the Septuagint text said. Yeah, they get 40 years from the time of the sentencing. And then another writer might have said, no, it's just generalizing. 40 years, it's maybe God gave them some credit for time served in the wilderness or whatever. So that's why. But we do have text which read differently. And one of the things that I want to do, and I stress this all the time, is being historically faithful. I want to look at these ancient witnesses and compare the text between sources in Deuteronomy and Numbers, and also texts which are like the Masoretic text with the Septuagint, with the Samaritan Pentateuch, with the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. So I just wanted to touch on that. Good question, Sharon. Hopefully that answered. Hey, Tom, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing well. Thank you. The Septuagint. I find that the Septuagint tends to clarify things for us and correct things. I think they got a little carried away. Personally. But I a couple of comments, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You were mentioning how often Moshe said to go in and occupy. How could that be? Could that be in how it's found in Deuteronomy over and over again? And could that be because of Moshe's fear that they weren't going that they might make the same mistake again, you know, and he's trying to stress to them, just go in and occupy. Could that be why it's repeated so often there in Deuteronomy? Because I think that might have been one of, I can imagine if I was in Moshe's shoes, I'd be afraid of that repetition, especially after seeing how often people make the same mistakes.
Exactly.
Even like you know, someone was saying, you know, why don't they just obey? Well, I ask myself that all too often myself. I must confess. So I wouldn't be too critical of them. Another thing I would say though too, and then take this for what it's worth, and I tried to explain the way I view this last week, the difference between Elohim and Jehovah, how they're used in the text, and how Elohim is describing when it's Elohim is used, it's describing the invisible and the unheard, the unseen, whereas Jehovah is describing what when Elohim interacts in a way that we can hear and see, and even the word, well, that's a different subject. I'm just trying to stay on topic here. So when it says, if you notice in Numbers, now I did.
Hang on, I lost you. You muted yourself, Tom. I didn't do it. You did.
Yeah, I must have did it when I typed. When I
just didn't want
that.
people to think I just got tired of listening to you and muted you. That wasn't what happened.
That's okay. My wife does that too. Send for yourself, men. Isn't that what that says? Could it not be read that way? And when the people come to Moshe and they say this, is Moshe? You know, I don't see a contradiction. Is what I'm trying to say, because Jehovah is speaking through the people, and they're afraid, and they want to send, and they want to, and he's acquiescing to the people. Okay. He's appeasing them. These are his children. Okay, you know, you've seen all my miracles, and how many times have they've seen all these miracles, and they still question. They're still questioning. So it's like, okay, fine. You want to? I can see you're reluctant to go in, so I'm going to let you send spies. And he speaks it through the people. So I don't see a contradiction with Moshe saying that the people said it, and this text saying that Jehovah told him to send for yourself men. That because that he was speaking, he was expressing their will to Moshe. Moshe relented. Yeah, okay, and he hears that as Jehovah speaking. I don't see that as a contradiction. Jehovah
well, a lot of people, just to your point, a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
A lot of people look at even where the wording is different, where it's even dramatically different, where a different person is ascribed an action in one text and a different person. They see all of those as we can come up with a reason for it. So I appreciate what you're doing. I understand that. I did it for a long time. I see that we have, in my view, we have different sources that report things differently, and I see that over and over and over. But again, a lot of people don't see that and think I'm wrong for seeing it like that. I admit that. I know that.
Okay. Well, I was just expressing another opinion.
Yeah.
Another way of reading it. So, you know, and I had the same question. Why would they need a guide? You know, because it was their fears. We're dealing with human beings here. Like, you know, something, you know, back in 1988, something I would call, I guess, something otherworldly happened to me, okay? That, you know, the person I was at that time questioned the existence of God and was very scientific, and something happened to me that I needed. And you would think, oh, well, and I know it was supernatural, however you want to express it. It wasn't natural. What happened? Okay, I know.
Right.
And today I have absolutely no doubt that there's a God, right? absolutely no doubt. But I still make mistakes.
Oh yeah.
I still don't obey, so why should we be so quick to criticize these people?
Let me ask you.
I wouldn't be.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So, according to what you're coming up with, just for the sake of the conversation, you've said these are people. I mean, they're scared. They want to go look at the land, and they're just nervous, and God understands that. So He allows them. He acquiesces to their fears, and that's, as I understand it, that's part of what you see there in the text. So, and correct me if I'm overstating that, but so then they do go into the land, and they're still afraid. The same suggestion that you made a moment ago about God acquiescing because they're just afraid of the giants. My God, man. I mean, it's scary. So they come back and they tell their friends, it's scary there. I'm wondering, according to that approach, why God doesn't say, well, okay, these guys were scared and I acquiesced to them and I let them sin. Now 603,550 men and then plus women and children, they're scared now. So why didn't He acquiesce to them? Why does He say, I tell you what, I already spied this land out. I went ahead of you. I determined that all you had to do was go up, but you were unwilling, and you now have broken the heart of this people, so you're all going to die until your last dead body falls dead in the desert. He's changed His approach. If the approach you presented, acquiescing to their request, he's had enough. Is that what your approach would be then? I'm done. I would 10 people vote no.
I would just read what it says. It was their reaction. This is more than just fear. Now they are disparaging the land. They're insulting the land itself, right? And they spread an evil report that they spied out. This is after they had brought back all this produce and these grapes and the pomegranates. Now they're giving a CNN fake news report. It's a land that eats up its inhabitants. All the people we saw in there are men of great. The Anak. They talk about how they want to go back into Egypt. It was their disparaging of the land.
They crossed the line, you're saying.
Yeah. It's what He says. Okay, look, I'm gonna allow you to send some spies. You're gonna go in. You're gonna see that I'm not lying, and we can do this. And it's a great land. And they go in and they see they're touring for 40 days, just seemingly touring, walking around. They bring back all this produce. They seem to go completely undetected, and then they come back, and after that, nothing happens. And oh no, we can't do it. And the land, they had no. That was a fake news. Because you think about later when Joshua sends which is the Haftarah, right? Joshua sends this 2 spies. From the moment they go into the land, they're being detected. It seems like they're dodging arrows the whole time they're there, and then they come back and they say, "Let's do it." Piece of cake.
Yeah.
Completely different story.
Yeah. It's like they learned. By the way, I tell people on my tours, when we get on the bus and we're in the desert, I'll say, listen, there are going to be reasons for you to think, the hotel's not as nice here. It's hot. It's, there's all sorts of things. You might get thirsty. Maybe you forgot to bring your water with you. I need you to remember one thing. Don't complain. Don't gripe. Nobody on the bus can complain about the desert, because I've read stories about people getting punished 40 years out here. So if you want to stay 40 years out here, complain. Otherwise, keep it zipped. When you get back to the States, tell people nice things about the desert. So, no, but it is, we do have, there are different interpretations of these texts. And that's the reason that I go to the trouble that I do to put these side by side. And that allows the person reading the document to go, oh yeah, there's no difference differences here. This is, I can explain this and they can put their own notes on it. So but I want that discussion. I want people to consider, look, for hundreds and hundreds of years, fundamentalist believers have said, and I grew up with this, there are no differences. There are no textual problems. There is nothing to see here except.
You haven't heard me say that, right?
No, I'm saying I have heard that all my life.
Okay.
So what I do, though, is I say, let's put it out there. Let's let people look at it. And then the decision falls to the person, and they can make that call. So, but I want different opinions on this. I've certainly, I grew up with the view that there's no difference in these accounts. But anyway, so people can look at the document. But appreciate your comments. Good stuff. Charles. Yeah. Oh, okay.
I was just going because then chapter 15. Now we have these ceremonies that are like you seem to be out of place, or I forget how you put it. Maybe those ceremonies were exercises and in ways that they would remember this event. Maybe that's what those were for. That they would and we see them inserted there. We also see them codified in the book of Leviticus. It's basically the same thing in Leviticus chapter 4, as you see in chapter 15 of Numbers, because this is where this is what those ceremonies were supposed to remind them of on a yearly basis, or whenever they would do these ceremonies, those particular ones. That also, and then, like I say, they're listed in the book of Leviticus also. So is it? I certainly see that possibility, although I can't exactly explain it, but I would like to think that back then, that's why they were put there in the book. Is these are reminders of this event and not to do this again. Trust Jehovah.
Just for clarity, you're suggesting that the specific sacrifices in Numbers 15 are specifically in some way to remind people of what? The wilderness spies story, or
the spy story? Yes. Because it was a congregational thing. It was a group thing. If you notice, that's what it was. If the whole congregation sins, and then it also mentions if an individual sins, that they would bring a female goat, right? A female hairy goat. That's what I would suggest. Yeah.
All right.
At least I see that possibility.
Okay.
I like to see. I prefer trying to rectifying the differences than just dividing it up and ripping it up and saying, well, this guy wrote that and somebody else wrote this, and
Well, I hear you. I take that as you're suggesting then that's what I do. That I just decided one day to.
No.
Okay, I'm just making sure.
Scholars do it. A lot of scholars do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly, there are differences of opinion on how to read these texts, and some would say if Numbers 15, if those laws are correlative to Leviticus chapter 4, then I would have a fun time. I think it would be interesting to take Leviticus 4 and put it side by side, not for any other reason than to see if those are in fact the same or different. If they are the same, why do we need both of them? So I would be interested in doing that, not to discredit the Bible or not to be mean or ugly or hateful or anything, but just simply to understand the text. The only reason I do this as many hours as I can stay awake every day of my life is because I want to look at it just like you, and I want to understand why do we have differences. It's not to disparage the text. So for instance, when I look at things comparatively, compare and contrast, and I look at Exodus 20 next to Deuteronomy 5, there are people who do not like that, because within those texts we have differences. There are people who just they don't want to see that, and they think that I'm, trying to discredit. Just to make my point, I'm just saying the whole reason I'm doing this is to try to understand if Numbers 13 and 14 describe the spies story, and Deuteronomy 1 describes the spy story, I want to put those side by side. The same way I did when I was a Christian, I would take Mark, Matthew, and Luke, and if it talks about a certain part of the story, I want to look at those side by side. It's a harmonistic approach, you might call it, whatever. So I do that, and I do that throughout the biblical text as an opportunity to discern perhaps which is an earlier source, which is a later source. Are there signs that a certain text has been edited? And that is the case. We see it when we compare Kings and Chronicles. We see it there too. So, but I just didn't want people to think, and I'm not saying necessarily that you intended that, but I don't want people to think that I'm just tearing stuff out of context and not giving it a fair shake. I just want to see, do we have differences? And I think we do. So, but I think a lot of them can be explained. To your point, I think a lot of them can be explained and should be explained as nothing more than a different telling.
Yeah, that's the approach I prefer.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Charles, how are you, sir?
I'm good, brother. How are y'all doing?
I'm doing okay.
This subject is really tracking on with a logic problem that I've got. I've been looking at the JEPD, particularly Milton Friedman's little book on it.
Yeah.
And he and others are placing D as the latest source, and yet I'm seeing it as the narrative that has the first person narration. So it seems logical to me that the first person narration would be the earliest possible source. And so that's a logic problem I have. And I was wondering if you could correct my logic, or I don't know why Milton seems to be coming to that latest source from linguistics, or maybe one of the other 7 reasons, but I'm going to need some help with this.
Okay.
All right.
All right. No, I think, first of all, I'll say you're talking about Richard Elliott Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible, I think, or his Bible with Sources Revealed, one of the two, or both. Both books I highly recommend. And as I've stated before, I'm not convinced personally of the entire validity of the documentary hypothesis. Not all scholars accept that either. So that is one of the approaches, one of the answers to some of the different sources that we see within the text. Primarily in the mid 1800s, it goes back further, hundreds of years earlier, where people began to notice things like, and I'll get to your question, by the way, we get to things where you go, well, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died and he buried him in, and somebody goes, I don't think that Moses wrote that. And the rabbis debate this, and some say, yeah, he wrote it. He was a prophet. He wrote it through his tears. And then in other texts, they say, no, Joshua wrote the final 8 verses. And they debate these things. What I do in my teaching now, and hopefully people understand this, is I am stepping into an argument that I didn't start. I'm stepping into a complexity where I'm searching for the answers, and I want to not accept what all the competing voices are saying, including the academic view that says Ross just go believe the documentary hypothesis from beginning to end. So that brings us to Deuteronomy. I had never read a book on the documentary hypothesis at the time that I'm describing. I'm reading along, and I noticed, to your point, that some of the text in Deuteronomy are written in the first person. And here's where I first noticed it. Everyone who has a Bible, which should be all of you fine Bible students, go to Deuteronomy 1. And this is what hit me. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness on the plain opposite Suf, but between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hatzerot, and Dizahav. By the way of Mount Seir, it takes 11 days to reach Kadesh Barnea from Horeb. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the Israelites just as the Lord had commanded him to speak. This was after he had defeated King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth and in Edrei. Beyond the Jordan, in the land of the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this law as follows. The Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, now, something hit me about 4 years ago when I read this that I'd never seen before, even though Deuteronomy was my favorite book and I'd read it so many times. As I read this, I could see the author of these first 5 verses as being someone who was not east of the Jordan River. Mm-hmm. I saw the writer, he said, these are the words that Moses spoke on the other side. So I said, what? Mind blown. Now, it hit me, and I said, surely everybody knows this, but I've always believed that Moses wrote the 5 books from Genesis 1:1 to Deuteronomy 34:12. It's in the water I drank. I heard this from a child. And then I said, but hang on. Whoever wrote this, it's a narrator's voice. It's someone who wrote this later. Now, what we find is that Deuteronomy contains a mixture. In Deuteronomy, this is what I learned since then. This is not just my view. It is the view the text presents. That you've got a document that appears to be part of this Deuteronomy book, which includes, it's a document that seems, it's first person. Like, let me show you this. Look at Deuteronomy 1, verse 9. At that time, I said to you, I am unable to bear myself to bear you. The Lord your God has multiplied you so that today you are as numerous as the stars of heaven. May the Lord, the God of your ancestors, increase you 1,000 times more and bless you as he promised you. But how can I bear the heavy burden of your disputes all by myself? Choose for each of your tribes individuals who are wise, and so forth. Verse 14, you answered me, the plan you have proposed is a good one. Now, I'm going to take us down a couple of trails here. This same story, the burden of leadership, is told in Numbers. It's also told in Exodus. In Exodus 18, it's not Moses' idea, it's Jethro's idea. Jethro is nowhere mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy. So I find these to be different stories, different sources, or the same story told differently by different sources. Now, your question, I did all that to lead up to, your question is, what most people believed, at least in the 19th century when the documentary hypothesis really gained widespread acceptance among the academics, Deuteronomy is so close, like when you read the story of the discovery of the scroll in the days of Josiah, 2 Kings 22:23, 2 Chronicles 34:35, you read that account, it describes the actions of not only Josiah, but the people of that day, and it fits more with Deuteronomy than any other book, right? It's like when a law is quoted or when a certain action is taken, it fits Deuteronomy and not Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers. So scholars began to propose, this is their view, and it's why I don't just wholesale accept the documentary hypothesis, even though people think I do, because they say, well, this so matches the events of Josiah's day that Josiah, in his day, this is the scholar view, they didn't find the scroll of Moses, they wrote Deuteronomy. And so almost without exception, Friedman is no exception, most scholars say that Deuteronomy was written in the time of Josiah and Jeremiah and Zephaniah, if you will, at the end of the first temple period. And they do that because they believe that this whole story of the discovery is a pious fraud. That that Deuteronomy, this is their view, that Deuteronomy was written to champion, to push Josiah's reform, which among other things moved the sacrificial cult exclusively to Jerusalem. It's called various, the name theology, where I place my name. You only sacrifice in the house that's built to my name, and so forth. See, none of that stuff occurs in the text prior to Deuteronomy. So you see, that's why they said that. Now, what I think, now here's the other thing. Deuteronomy contains what appear to be different authors. Like I just showed in Deuteronomy 1, there's a narrator's voice, which is later, and it's in a different place. And there is a historical document affixed. The narrator, it feels like, in Deuteronomy 1, has a document written in a first person by, let's say, Moses, and it's first person, and he has that, or she. And this scribe wants to make sure that future generations know what this thing is. Because you could just publish it like that. But they say, all right, what am I holding here? Okay. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan, on the other side of the Jordan, in the wilderness. It's just, he's putting all this right before the actual document that contains Moses' words. Now, as he works...
documentary, it's just introduction. I got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you work through Deuteronomy, you'll see that it goes back and forth and tells things that Moses didn't know. I'll give you an example. All right, Moses wasn't alive when these things happened. Okay. So if you look at, let's see, let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 2. One more example, Charles, just to show you. Now, it begins in chapter 2. We journeyed back into the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea as the Lord had told me. So this is our first person document. Now, keep going. We're going to go down to verse 8. So we passed by our kin, Deuteronomy 2:8, the descendants of Esau who live in Seir, leaving behind the route of the Arabah, and leaving behind Elat and Ezion Geber. When we headed out along the route of the wilderness of Moab, the Lord said to me, do not harass Moab or engage them in battle, for I will not give you any of its land as a possession, since I have given Ar as a possession to the descendants of Lot. Now watch, I'm going to change my voice to show you a different hand. The Emim, a large and numerous people as tall as the Anakim, had formerly inhabited it. Bear with me on my little voice here. Like the Anakim, they are usually reckoned as Rephaim, though the Moabites call them Emim. Moreover, the Horim had formerly inhabited Seir, but the descendants of Esau dispossessed them, destroying them and settling in their place, as Israel has done in the land that the Lord gave them as a possession. I'm sorry, that even got on my nerves. But here's the point. The different voice there is it gives itself away because it says this whole displacement of these people is just like Israel did when it came to possess the land that Lord gave them. You realize that if this has to be written no earlier than the time that Israel has dispossessed the former inhabitants of the land. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I get that. I see those. I honestly did think you were totally bought into the documentary hypothesis, but when Friedman says that D was written last,
Yeah.
I don't think logically it doesn't seem to me that it could be, because that's where we find our first person narrative. I mean, it helps to divide the documentary hypothesis, but I'm not going to give it an A+.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Arguments against the documentary hypothesis are worth looking into, but I think almost it is a very good theory that is predominantly correct. Now, what I mean by that is you have to look at the nuance within it. So here's an example. The things that I described were to answer directly your question, and that is within Deuteronomy, we have what you and I, Charles, would identify as that first person core, that authentic original document that Moses wrote, or a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. All right. But affixed to that are some materials that are very, very, very late. Give you an example. Now, most scholars would say that the earliest strata of Deuteronomy, like if you're reading along the piece that I just demonstrated in Deuteronomy 2, you go, well, that's late. See, it wasn't written by Moses or in his time. It's written later by someone else. Somebody might say maybe Joshua, who knows, maybe hundreds of years later. I'm not going to get into that yet. But here's the thing. You also have chapter 12 through 26, which some scholars believe as a whole is the earliest piece of Deuteronomy. This law, it's called the Law Code. But guess what they date it to, Charles? They date it to the 7th century BCE, to the time of Josiah. They say that's the Torah code. That's the Torah that was found in the temple. I believe that's not the Torah that was found in the temple. I believe that the Torah of Moses that they found didn't contain chapter 12 through 26. Now, one more piece. If you read Deuteronomy, you start in chapter 1, verse 1, Hebrew or English works, and you read along, you get to chapter 11, and Moses is saying, when you get into the land, you're going to do this ceremony on Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And then you get to chapter 12, and it's like Moses interrupts himself. And he talks from chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, all those chapters about various laws. And then in chapter 27, it's like Moses goes, oh yeah. Anyway, what I was saying back in chapter 11 is that you're going to cross in the land and do the ceremony. That, to me, is a late, much later. And I know that some people don't like to hear that, but if you compare the laws, chapter 12 through 26 of Deuteronomy, with laws that we have elsewhere in the 5 books, we have more than 100 laws in that section that we've never seen before. And we have differences. Exodus 12, for instance, talks about the Passover. Here's what you have to do with the Passover when you cook it. You cook it on a flame. Do not boil it.
Do not boil it.
Deuteronomy, guess what? So we've got differences. Now, some people don't want to look at those. I want to look at them and say, what does that tell me? It tells me these are different sources from different authors. So very specifically, I love this topic, and it's why I get into it. And but to your point, I think that now, by the way, you'll notice that Friedman, especially as you get into his theory, he and Frank Moore Cross and Albright and everyone who's ever looked at this, the modern scholars, the earlier 19th, 20th century scholars, they've all recognized different strata within Deuteronomy. Stuff that was written by Moses at Moses' time, if they admit there's a Moses. And then there's some who say, that none of it's early and none of it's late. But they recognize that the language indicates to them that it's been written over a period of time. My proposal, where I would look at the documentary hypothesis around D, we have JEPD. D is our Deuteronomy text, as we call it. It's the name we're stuck with. I would say that within Deuteronomy is a hint, traces of that original work that Moses penned, and that around that original work is other language which indicates another person, a narrator, an editor that's later. So I would say to you or anyone who wants to read Richard Elliott Friedman's stuff, he's one of the greats in this field. Doesn't mean he's right on everything, but I think he's definitely the man of our time who's done the most research in this field. But I've got other authors that I can recommend too. But I think you're on the right path, Charles, but leave your mind open and continue to pray and seek and use common sense. And I think you'll come to a view which is not only sound academically in terms of the Bible, but also sound from a theological point of view. So you'll begin to see, you're probably already doing it, the differences in the different voices, the different hands that are writing.
I see the different voices. You taught me that, but Friedman's good. He articulates well the general argument, but the dating that he gives from the 700s to the 900s BCE, first person narration doesn't fit into that timeline.
Right.
And so that was so it's not my model. It's Milton's. That's my opinion right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we're all investigating. We can all be investigators, and I think we are to some degree. I don't know of anyone on here who's not interested in getting to the truth. And I've never said, well, whenever you get to where I am, you'll have the whole truth, nothing but the truth. I'm among all of you in the same quest. I mean, I have questions. I don't have it all figured out, but I'm at least noticing, and I think all of us are noticing the difficulties and trying to come to a true and accurate reason for these questions that we see in the text. And what I find interesting is that, like with the Moses scroll, the interesting thing about the Moses scroll is that some of the problems that we find in the text aren't included in this manuscript. So, for instance, you have, and people go, well, do you know it's authentic? No, I mean, I wrote in my book in such a way that I said, look, the only way to know for sure is to find it and test it. And then I'll be the first to say it's either tested authentic or it's from a goat that was born in 1879. I mean, whatever. But we have to be willing to look at these things. And I think the more that we peel the onion back, the more we get to, what exactly is this going to show? So, for instance, in the Moses scroll, in our Deuteronomy, it says back in Deuteronomy 27, when you cross into the land, you're going to put some of you on Mount Ebal, some of you on Gerizim, and you're going to do the blessings and the curses. You've heard me say this, and then jumps right into the curses, but doesn't mention the blessings. The rabbis notice this, and they say, well, there would have been matching blessings, but we just don't have them. Well, the Shapiro scroll has blessings and curses, and it also is lacking something very interesting, and that is the Moses Shapiro, the manuscript that Moses Shapiro brought forward, doesn't have chapter 12 all the way through 26. None of that's there. And I've used this example too. You go, well, man, that's some of the best stuff in the Bible. That can't be true. You know, what about the king? Well, we know that God never wanted a king, and I don't have to go into that again unless somebody pushes me in just a little bit, and I'll be happy to jump into it. But chapter 12 through 26 is considered by many scholars to be the earliest strata. I consider it to be the latest. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me to find out that chapter 12 through 26 comes from a period, get this, about the time of King Josiah. I think that's true. I think they're right about that. I think that piece, I think that comes from the time of Josiah, from the end of the temple period. And what I find fascinating is that we have two prophets, prophets who have books named for them in our Bible from the time of Josiah. And one is Zephaniah, and he says that the priests were doing violence to the Torah. What's that mean? What does that mean? Oh, no. Well, Jeremiah is even more specific. Jeremiah says, he's from the time that this scroll is found. He said, who are we to say that we are wise and the Torah of the Lord is with us when the lying pen of the scribes have made the Torah into a lie? What does that mean? I mean, there is something going on at the end of the biblical period, as we would call the end of the temple, first temple period. And so there is something going on with the text of the Bible, and the prophets tell us. The official word from the White House press secretary at the time, and this is both sides, this is for Kings and Chronicles. Kings and Chronicles says, man, there's a revival going on. Look out into the streets, everything. King Josiah's got a revival going on. Whoop, whoop. But if you read Jeremiah and Zephaniah, they don't know anything about this revival. They're not talking about it at all. So there's some discrepancy there. And I'm fascinated. I think this period, the end during Josiah's reign, I think that period is one of the most interesting and important periods for how we got our Bible. I think you cannot ignore that period. And I think the text tells us, look, they were destroying text. Jeremiah tells us in Jeremiah 36 that he and Baruch had produced a copy of Jeremiah, of his prophecies, and the monarch pulled out a knife and cut that thing to pieces and cast it into a fire. That was the original Jeremiah. And guess what? We know that story because of the current version of Jeremiah. I mean, if they're destroying the words of the prophets, do we suspect that that's a wonderful generation? No. It's why they got destroyed. It's why they were carried away captive. They were monkeying with the text. Everybody know what that word means, monkeying with? They were monkeying with the text, and they were doing damage and violence to it. And Jeremiah seems to know about a text that we don't have. What's interesting also is that if you look at the Masoretic text of Jeremiah, it reads differently and is arranged differently and is a different length than the Greek version of Jeremiah. Now, you might go, well, I'm going to go with the Hebrew. Well, I would have too, until I learned that some of the Dead Sea Scrolls written in Hebrew match the order and arrangement and wording of the Greek Jeremiah, and they're older than anything else we have. So we have all these questions, and I know that some people might get a little nervous and anxious and say, oh, I don't like this, it's uncomfortable. I get it. I understand. But I am in love with this quest, and my quest is about discerning, getting back to what can we discover if we're honest to Moses, honest to God, if we're looking at these ancient texts and making sense of it. And I think a lot of people are enjoying this trip with me. I mean, we're on a trip together. I think you're on the trip too, Charles.
I'm trying. The documentary hypothesis is well, there's so much in it that you can't ignore it. If you're walking this path, you can't ignore, if you're going to deal with the differences at all.
Yeah,
you have to be knowledgeable about this. But just a little signpost along the road is Deuteronomy, logically, in my mind, cannot be the latest. It's logically, it's got to be the earliest. And I was wondering why I was in such disagreement on the timing, and it's okay. All right. Well, thanks for the input.
You and I noticed the same thing. There's a tension in the text. We see some parts of Deuteronomy that seem to reflect something very, very ancient, and some pieces of Deuteronomy which seem to be very, very late. In fact, I just watched, I rarely watch other people teaching the Bible just because I don't have time. But early one morning this past week, I watched on 2 times the speed. In fact, some of you might want to do that with my classes that go long. Just put them on go to 2x, and you don't have to listen to me for an hour. You can listen to me for 30 minutes. That's as fast as it'll go, so I can't give you anything better than that. But what I did, Jacob Behrman of History Valley interviewed, Clody says she does that. See there, I know, Clody. No, I don't blame you. I do that all the time. But I listened to Jacob Behrman on History Valley's YouTube channel interviewing Richard Elliott Friedman. And he asked him questions. You might want to check that out, Charles. Some of you may want that as well. And he just gets into all these questions, and he gives his view. You know, what makes you think that the documentary hypothesis is true? And he's very matter of fact. Look, he's in his 80s now, I think, late 70s or 80s. And this has been his academic career, as the whole theory, the documentary hypothesis. So he's a believer. As we say, he drank the Kool-Aid, and he is now selling the Kool-Aid. So he's the guy in our generation, but it gives you directly, you get his input or his ideas, and it's the same as what you're reading in the book, but it's just a little piece of his knowledge. Again, I'm going to recommend, if anyone wants to understand, whether you believe it or not, you don't have to agree with it, but if you really want, it's one of my most important books I've ever read in my life, I think, are the 2 books by Friedman. Again, I don't accept every detail of it, but it's like that with any book I read. But I'm telling you, who wrote the Bible? You can find it on my website, rossknichols.com. And then the other is The Bible with Sources Revealed by Richard Elliott Friedman. Good stuff, Charles.
Yeah, there's 15 years between those 2 books, but if you want your theories tested, ask Jacob Berman to interview you. You'll be forced into you'll be forced into putting your logic on the table. How about I shut up a little while, let some other people talk.
Well, I think I probably need to do the same. So let's get Nikita up. Nikita, Shabbat Shalom. How are you? Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.
Shalom and greetings to the congregation of the Most High.
Hey, Nikita.
Love class. How are you, dear?
I'm doing wonderfully. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. I'm fine. I wanted to talk about the section when the children of Israel were hesitant and they wanted the spies and all of this. That part.
Yep.
My mantra, my thing in life, my title, that which I look forward to is let the Most High be the Most High, and let be obedient. A lot of us want to give the Israelites, the Hebrews, the children, that they feared to do that which the Lord had told them to do, considering that they had been sustained by the Most High for a year. It was after the second year, the first month. They trusted that. And sometimes when we're sustained by something for everything that we need, we want to get lazy and don't want to do anything ourselves.
Yeah.
But now it's time to put up or shut up. I mean, the covenant between the Most High and his children, the Most High fulfilled his part, was continually fulfilling his part in taking them out of Egypt and now sustaining them for over a year. And now, okay, now you have to get up and you have to do your part. That's when they back off.
Yeah.
That's when they back off. It was their turn to contribute to maintaining their part of the covenantal relationship with the Most High, which was to be their obedience.
Yeah.
Okay, the longer that, most of us, if you have children, you got to know that if you keep doing something for a child, when that child can do it for themselves, they won't do it. They'll let you do it for them.
Right.
I mean, there's got to be a point to where now that you know, or you trust me enough, that you do it second nature, knee jerk type of reaction.
Yeah.
So, if your child comes home and the financial stability of the house is not in place, they'll reach up and cut the light on, like, I don't know if it's going to come on, or if it's going to be dark. I don't know if mom, dad paid the bill.
Right.
But if they're always coming home, and when they hit that switch always comes on, then they don't have built into them that the fear that it won't work this time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing with the children of Israel. The Lord had not failed them. I mean, he had spectaculously and wondrously came through for them since their reintroduction to him in Egypt.
Yeah.
Not one plague failed. It's not like one frog showed up and the rest stayed home. It was a completely wonderful experience from their point of view to watch and see the Egyptians suffer under the oppression of the Most High as they had suffered under the oppression of the Egyptians.
Right.
I mean, some of them, it might have been even comical up until the last plague, of course.
Yeah.
So at this point, you have been well grown. You have been well trained. You know the relationship that I have up with you. So now I've given you my statutes, my laws, my ordinances. Now it's time for you to get up and take possession of the land, to fulfill that which I had promised to your ancestors. It's time for you to put some skin in the game. And of course, they're testing their limits of how much they can get away with not doing. But we don't have to do this. We'll stay here, or we don't want to go because it's too much for us. We're not ready. The Most High knows us. He knows what we're ready to hear. So when we don't accept things or reject things that he gives us, it's our indictment on his knowledge of us, saying that he's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There's no humility there.
Well, did you see, just to jump in, did you see, like, the way I understand it is when God, your point is, hey, it's time to put up or shut up. But when God said, go in and take possession, this is a piece that a lot of people, I think, miss. This is the point. I'm bringing you to a land that I lifted my hand and swore to your ancestors to give to you. Now go in and possess it. Go up and possess it. And the main point of what we see in both accounts, Numbers 13, 14, and Deuteronomy chapter 1, is that they chose not to. Not only did they not go in and possess as they were commanded, but in my view, and what I think the text is saying is not only did they refuse to, it says they refused, but it says you were unwilling. Not only did you say, I'm not, you said, I'm not going to, you can't. It's like a child would say, you can't make me. Not any of my kids, but I've heard that some people's kids might say that. But the idea is that you're not willing to go in and possess, and then in the opposite, in fact, God had already checked it out. God had already said it's good, go in and possess it. And then they said, I know that God searched this place out, but we need to send someone to search it out. I just see those as contrasted. I see them as what led them down the path to 40 years wandering is the fact that they just didn't obey.
Yes, they did not obey. They challenged the Most High as the genie in a bottle type of thing. I'll let you know when I'm ready to go, or when I go see it. Then, if they look weak enough for me to effortlessly conquer, then I'll go. But the thing is, the Most High's glory will be made known. It's the same thing with the Egyptians. If he had taken the Israelites from a weak people, then that glory of the Most High would not have been abroad for when the people of Jericho had heard about the reputation of the Most High and his people.
Yeah.
See, that's the problem with us not knowing all of the story. We take our little piece, attach our fear to it, and now the Most High is not capable, not us.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the claim of fear is invalidated when they easily, willingly, and eagerly follow any alternative option proposed by a man.
Yeah.
So when the 10 spies, they're like, oh, we can't do this. And like you said, the Most High, and the word says the Most High had already told them, I took care of you, you're fine, you can do this. Just go ahead and apply what you know of me, not of them. And Joshua and Caleb, thank goodness, defended the Most High. So how quickly you forget.
Yeah.
You didn't take yourself out of Egypt. He did.
Right.
And since there was no Red Sea, because the Most High fought that battle, he opened the Red Sea and they came on through. There's not going to be anything different. He will fight for you, but you have to be present. But that's all I wanted to contribute. It's just like babies, like you said, they want to test the limits of their parents to see how far they can go. Same thing, people are people. Sometimes we never age or mature. We test the limits of the Most High to see exactly if we can get him to do what we want him to do, as opposed to us doing what he wants us to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of times I hear people talk about, well, if I was there, this is, and I like to entertain that, but I think people are people, whether they're living in the Bronze Age or now. I think a lot of times, as bad as that may sound, I don't want to think that we would make the same mistakes, but we might, just.
Yes, we do. People. I mean, even when we feel like the Most High has answered our prayer, we'll go ask somebody else their opinion. Yeah. And you know how we're shopping for something, you look, well, what did these people who already bought it say? What was their experience? Right. I'm not saying that that's not wise or whatever, but everybody's experience will be different to some degree because they don't have the history of knowledge of the Most High that we have. Some people who have a great faith is because that great faith has been proven and worked out in their relationship with the Most High. You're like, oh, I wish I could have faith like that. You're not wishing for something that's not applicable to you. Apply that which you know, because a lot of us don't want to be corrected. We don't want to be corrected in thinking that the Most High will be on our side in something that will have a taint of unrighteousness. And of course, he will not. He does not. He's never in league with that which is unrighteous. So we need to get our perspectives right and seeing that maybe we want something at a particular time that is not right for us at that time. But instead of giving the Most High the grace to show us something different and believe in that, we go off on our own and then get mad at him when it doesn't work. Can't have it both ways. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Thank you, Ross.
Hey.
For Shabbat.
Thank you, Nikita. Shabbat Shalom. Brother Tom.
Yeah, I heard
There he is.
What Nikita was saying. I heard a similar point today about, kind of like when they're cutting the umbilical cord. Here they were being fed, they were being taken care of under the cloud in the wilderness, and it's like, okay, now you're gonna have to go collect your own food and take care of yourselves, and I'll be there, but time to grow up. But the reason I put my hands up is I just wanted to gain a better understanding of where you're coming from. Like in the Moses Scroll book, right? With the scroll, the Moses Scroll itself, right? After the events with the Midianites, where they were whoring with the Midianite women, Moab, the daughters of Moab, right?
Mhm.
And then it says, I'm reading from DC 4, and Elohim commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, to do them in the land that you are crossing there to possess it. Guard yourselves. You shall not add to his command. You shall not diminish from it. Guard yourselves, lest you forget and you make a carved thing. Okay, so what I'm curious is, would you say that these statutes and judgments that he's speaking of here are the Ten Commandments? Or?
Yes. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay.
Excellent question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Fair
a
enough.
good question and a fair question. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right. Miriam, Shabbat Shalom. You muted. I know you probably. There you go. I see it off.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, sister. How are you?
Good. Shabbat shalom to all.
Shabbat Shalom.
My little minute questions is, okay, I'm concerned about the issues about the Midianites. Why were they so important in the scriptures? Because it says that Joseph was taken by them at one time, okay? And then Moses was connected to him by marriage,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So my question is, were they perhaps a fair and honest type of trader or travelers? Or was this just by chance and happenstance?
Excellent question. I tell you, I love the Midianites. Throughout the biblical text, we encounter what you just touched on. There seems to be, now we do have this episode in the book of Numbers where Midianite women and Moabite women are involved, and it's kind of confusing, why do we have these two groups of women in the same spot? And people, again, want to put Midian somewhere else. But let's just look. If we go through the text, you hit the high ones, you hit the big points. Midianites, at least one strand of that story in Genesis 37, has the Midianites involved in bringing Joseph into Egypt, meaning that God would use the Midianites to bring about what ultimately, according to the biblical writers, is the establishment of his people as a nation, right? He entrusts good old Joseph to the hands of the Midianites. And then when Moses flees Egypt on the way, so that's the way in. Here's what I think is so fascinating. Why is it that God uses Midian to bring Israel to Egypt, but uses Midian to bring Israel out? So what I mean by that is he flees, Moses flees and ends up living with and marrying a Midianite woman. He's with a Midianite family. He's taught by a Midianite priest. And Jethro, Ruel Hobab, as he's called in the different sources, we have this encounter with the people of Midian. And what we find out is that it's while he's living with the Midianites and shepherding a Midianite flock that he encounters God at a place called Horeb. There he learns a name of God. Get this, I know people, your eyebrows will raise, that people did not know prior to this. So Exodus 3, Exodus 6 describe an encounter between Moses and God, where God says, by this name I was not known to the fathers. I was known by El Shaddai and so forth. People try to explain this away, but the texts say that it's while he's in Midian, working a Midianite flock, that he learns God's name. So we've got this encounter, and as you said, Moses' marries a Midianite. His kids are part Midianite. So later we even have a priesthood in the book of Judges descended from Moses who are part Midianite. I think that this is one of the keys to the story, and I think that you can't, without Midian, both people and place, campsites of Midian, you miss out on the whole story of Moses. Moses is intimately connected with Midian and the story of the desert people. Now, I would just add one other point, Miriam, is that in my view, the Midianites are, and I use linguistics to prove this, at least to myself. I'm still working out the details, but I think that Midian indicates, similar to our word Bedouin, they're even at least closely related in Semitic language, I think. There must be a connection there because they both indicate a people of the desert. So I don't see Midian as a land like Narnia. I think that the Midianites are desert dwellers, and that's why we see them all over the place in the biblical text. Did that answer your question at all about the importance of Midian?
Yes. One more question.
All right.
Okay, in Numbers 25, 37 to 31, you talked about, okay, the tzitzits, the cords, and the color that it has to be, which is blue. I don't understand, okay, why blue? I love blue, but why was that chosen as the blue cord?
Yeah. We're familiar, most of us on here today are familiar, a lot of the standard tzitzit are white and only white, and that's because there is, get ready, I know you're not used to hearing that there are differences of opinion, but there are differences of opinion as to what that blue is. In Hebrew, it's techelet. If you're spelling that in English, T-E-C-H-E-L-E-T, techelet. And techelet is used many times in the priestly literature, particularly from Exodus 25 through basically the end of the book of Numbers. We have the fringe is mentioned twice in the Pentateuch. Once in Numbers 15, 37 through 41. The other time is in Deuteronomy 22. In Deuteronomy 22, there's no mention of techelet. The word translated as blue. The one I'm holding here is a Karaite tzitzit. It's called a fringe. And this is one style. I know you see, if you look at this on the video, you'll see it's sort of a light blue. It almost gets lost in the color of my white beard. But if you look at it, it's sort of a light sky blue. Different people debate over the color. But where do you get the blue is the biggest question that's debated. And if you do a study, you'll find a couple of different options. One is that the blue that is for techelet is made from a particular sea creature. I think it's a chilazon. And then another says that it comes from some other creature like a snail. And I've read all these different theories that they were extinct until a certain year and miraculously they showed up. And, there are various stories out there that present this. But But obviously, the ancient writers found whatever the hell it was. By the way, some argue that it's a plant-based dye. We just don't know is the true answer. We've got descriptions in our ancient sources that describe the blue, and sometimes the blue is described as a sky blue, like I have here. At other times, it's more, the word used is more of an indigo. So a lot of the Orthodox have just said, look, we're just going to wear white fringes until the Messiah comes or someone can convince us as to what to hell it actually was. But like you know, you said, I love blue. I just want to know why was that particularly described? Various theories on that. Some we've seen in some Egyptian drawings of certain color fringes on garments. Maybe it was a sign of royalty. Who knows? I know that we like to have direct answers, but Miriam, I think that the bottom line is we almost have to say on this one, we know it was some form, some shade of blue, we think, from all of our sources, and it was to be part of the fringe, and we just have lost that bit of knowledge now. Is that fair?
Very fair. Shabbat shalom to all.
Hey, Shabbat shalom, my friend. All right. I've got Clody. How are you? Shabbat shalom, sister.
Shabbat shalom. I made the video ready before. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you and see you.
So I wanted to make it a little bit relatable, just like Nikita, because I remember once I was trying for two friends of mine to enter them to one project, theatrical project. Mm-hmm. And I was really discussing with the producer to get them both, and I was taking myself out. And one of these two friends called me because she learned that the other one was in, and she told me, how could you do this to me, and how could you take me out of the project? Not understanding that I got myself out of the project.
Right.
And I was furious because she really didn't trust me on this. I could never do something bad for my friend. I was furious, and that's how she lost me, almost. But what I meant with that is, while we were teaching the class, the verse of Jesus in Luke 4:12 was echoing to me. It's weird how two years ago or 3 years ago, if you mentioned I to me, I would go, okay, don't talk to me about him. But now I really consider myself like one of the best students of Jesus.
Yeah.
And what Jesus said to the devil is, it is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test. And if we want to see it in the Old Testament, it's in Deuteronomy 6:16. Do not put Yehovah your God to the test as you tested him at Massah. And I think that that's what happened in this case.
Yeah.
And I never saw them like this. Like in Deuteronomy, you see that God was speaking to Moses, and they proposed to go and spy, while in the Numbers, God says to them, go and spy. And I was also, I'm sorry, I got some information mixed up, but try to sort it a little bit out. I was looking also how the Ark of the Covenant, or the presence of the Ark of the Covenant, is a synonym to the presence of God in Numbers, but it's not like that in Deuteronomy. And I remembered now, I don't remember if it's in Chronicles or in Kings, but I remember that when they they lift the Ark of Jehovah for the battles, they say that Jehovah was with them. Well, it's only the Ark that they took, and it's. I think that the seeds are becoming to be a little bit more discernible. Is the word? The seeds are becoming to be more clear. You can see many things, and I never noticed how in Jeremiah's time he is saying that the pen of the scribes are, I don't remember exactly the phrase. However, we can even date when those bad seeds, at least a period of those bad seeds were planted
Inserted
in the Bible. Yeah. I love the class. I love also the discussion. Shabbat shalom. That's all for me.
Hey, great comments. And I like that, everybody knows, at least people who know me, know that this is what I live for. It's a discussion. We have stepped into a debate, a discussion, a dialogue. We're trying to understand why certain writers use certain vocabulary, certain imagery, certain pictures, and other writers don't. And I think that's why it's so important to pay attention. And as you said, it's getting clearer. I'm the same way. Look, years ago, I was studying the New Testament, and I said, this was me. You're in different places. Some of you might be Christians, and this is not meant to insult in any way, I promise you. But for me, I thought I have a problem between Paul and Jesus, and I just see them saying different things. And so I remember praying, and I said, Lord, don't let me get in trouble here. I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I'm going to put Paul to the side. That's what for me, I'm going to put Paul to the side. And I'm going to only go with Jesus. That was my thinking then. And then, I had other things that I came upon that made me say, I see the New Testament and maybe the Hebrew Bible don't agree on this, and I'm just going to side for safety's sake with the Hebrew Bible, and I'm going to put the New Testament aside. So I've done this, and some people have challenged me and said, well, Ross, where do you stop? You're making me think that the next thing is you're throwing everything out, you're burning bridges. I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm looking at things very honestly. And what's interesting, you bring up Jesus and the New Testament. I haven't read the New Testament. I mean, I'll look something up if I hear something, or if someone asks me a question. I have family members who are Christian, and I'm fine discussing that, and I never dissuade them from where they're at spiritually. But what I'm thinking is that now, like you, sometimes something will pop in my head. I go, oh, wait a minute. That makes sense now. It makes sense now. So rather than throw things away or light a match and burn a bridge, I'm not doing that. I'm saying, given what we're learning, if I have, for instance, when I look at the synoptic gospels, Mark, Matthew, Luke, side by side, and I see that things are worded slightly differently, whereas before I would listen to a rabbi or someone who would say, well, these things don't agree. Clearly, we have the false pen of the scribes. And they say, you need to throw this away. Jesus lied. The thumbnail on their video says, the Gospels are full of misquotations. Well, now I'm saying, hold on there, buddy, because the same measure you use to critique that goes
you should use
where
with your scripture.
So what I'm saying is, let's be honest. Let's use equal measure, and let's truly seek to understand what these texts meant. And there are times where a New Testament text may be something we need to look at to understand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something more. If we go a little bit more, even beyond that. When you think that there is no answer, you push so much, and you try so much. And when, at least that's what happened to me during my walk with God.
Yeah.
Whenever I thought that I don't have answers anymore, there are no answers anymore, there is something like a period of wilderness, as in silence, and you're like paused, and then it rings, and then it dawns on you, and then God gives the answer. So let's be, I agree with you. Let's be honest, and then God will give us the answer.
I'm with you. I think there's nothing more fun than to look at these texts. And my field, my primary interest, I even, Seth and I were talking this week, I mentioned, it's like throughout my journey, I started with the Old Testament, New Testament. I probably even picked up an interest along the way in other things like the Deuterocanonical, the Apocrypha books, the Dead Sea Scrolls. I get all these things, and I'm fascinated with Josephus and Philo, and it's just endless. And then as I get into it and I get older, I think, okay, let's say that God grants me 120 years. I mean, I'm not promised that. I mean, I hope he does. But if he does, and I'm strong for years and years and years, what do I want to focus on? And I can't learn everything, so I probably will never be an expert on the Deuterocanonical books of the New Testament, or even the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, though that's my primary love. Now I'm interested more than anything else in the Pentateuch, the 5 books, and understanding how that came to be. Again, I'm not a fundamentalist anymore with the text of the Pentateuch where I used to be, but I still respect and love it, but I'm curious. Now I'm curious. If I read a text that, and I'm comparing things, Exodus, a priestly source with something else, I'm interested in these differences because now I'm curious which one's older. Can we tell? Can we discover those things? And along the way, something will hit me and I'll go, hey, what did that say in the New Testament? Go back and look at it. And again, I don't claim to be a Christian or a Jew, or I don't have a particular, that's me. I don't have a label, but I'm a lover of the text and a seeker after the truth.
Oh, you have. You walk with God, right?
That's it. And I feel like I'm in good company with this group because we don't necessarily agree on every point, but what we do is we're willing to question, and there's no one in this group that says, hey, I'm in charge and it's my way or the highway. It's something that we have to come together and sort out, and that's why things that we're working on, the Discord, that even though a lot of us haven't spent a lot of time on there, the tool is in place, and we can really use that to have good conversations and challenge one another. So anything else, Clody? All right. Shabbat Shalom. Okay, Todd and Angel.
Oh, we're on. Okay. Actually, I was going to bring up a topic, but you'd already done brought it up, actually, about the, some parts of the New Testament not quite matching, the old Hebrew text and stuff like that, and talking about the lying pen of the scribes. During the first few centuries of the church fathers, there was also the lying pen of the church fathers.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff that doesn't line up in the New Testament wasn't really there to begin with. There's something they put in there to push either the Trinity, the virgin birth, or the virgin birth, or something like that. Because we have a copy of Matthew that doesn't even have the virgin birth, and everything flows. I mean, everything flows.
I'm sorry. Is that the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew? by
It's
George Howard?
it's an older version. I got it. There was a link. We've had it for a
Okay.
year or two, but it was a link that I got from Doug over at Jesus Words Only,
Okay.
and we downloaded it and printed it out and have gone line by line with it. And basically, what it is, it's a collaboration of many different versions of Matthew that have been kind of compiled together.
Yeah.
And you can take it or leave it for whatever sections that you run across. It's just one of those kind of things. But I find it interesting that there's a lot of things they've added in there. What was it? 1 John, where he says these three things agree.
Yeah.
And they throw the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit in there. Well, originally that wasn't in there.
Right.
So there's things that they do to that. Of course, when I was in church, I was, we weren't very welcomed about that kind of theory, but go figure that one. But it's, we're in the same boat too. That's one of the reasons, like you said, we take Paul, kick him to the side. I think Karen says kick him to the left. But I don't know if kick would be the proper word I'd use. But there's other things in the Gospels themselves, in the four Gospels, that sometimes don't quite line up with what it says in the Hebrew, and that's the stuff that you've got to wonder. It's like, okay, is that added in? Because I don't want to think that it was, but there's always a chance of that happening. But
let me.
It's funny.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the question that what I originally said. I hope I don't make you lose your question, because I wanted to. You brought this up. What I did years ago when I said I'm going to put this aside. I'm not. This isn't me anymore. I just need to clear my mind and focus on the Hebrew Bible. It was because I took the view. I became convinced by listening to other people criticize the New Testament and seeing the disparities by myself. I kept seeing those. So what I did ultimately was I said, okay, well, I'm going to put that aside. And part of the reason I did was because I had become convinced that the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 1:1 through Deuteronomy, through Chronicles, was absolutely without mistake. Because I took my fundamentalism from Christianity, where I learned in church, this is the holy, inspired, inerrant, authoritative Word of God. There is no, it's God breathed, and that was the view I learned.
King James only. King James.
Yeah, pretty much. At least as a kid, I was King James only. Good Southern Baptist boy, so I had that view, and so when I found out that there were problems between the different accounts in the Gospels or between Paul and Jesus, I said, well, no longer does that fit my definition of the holy, inspired, inerrant, authoritative Word of God. So it's out. But now, and then I walk my fundamentalist self into the Hebrew Bible, and I say, thank God Almighty, free at last, free at last. I have now arrived at the holy, inspired, authoritative, and inerrant Word of God. And if I ask any of my rabbi friends, they'll say, you got it, Ross. Now you're right. You got the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. And I was fine, and everybody loved me. Well, not everybody, but quite a few people loved me as long as I sang out of that hymnal. But when I finally one day said, Ross, if you're going to be honest and you're going to follow Torah principles and you're going to use equal weights and measures, you have to look at the Hebrew Bible with the same critical view that you looked at the New Testament text. Yep. And see, I had read books by people like Bruce Metzger and, the text of the New Testament, is it reliable? And I took a very academic view of that I learned from reading. And the view was, look, this is not a matter of faith. We're talking fact here. So I became convinced that certain academic statements were real, that we have thousands of manuscript fragments of the New Testament. And and I had that, but again, see, I still had that view that the Hebrew Bible was one little text, and it could be traced back all the way to the Moseses and the Joshuas and the Isaiahs and Jeremiah. So, but I finally said, what do the scholars say about the Hebrew Bible? About that text? Lo and behold, you find some of the same questions. So anyway, all of that to say, what we're doing now is we're looking at these texts. We have many, many witnesses of these texts, and this is what textual criticism is about. If I'm looking at a story of the spies, do I have that story in the Septuagint? Do I have that story in the Samaritan Pentateuch? Get this. This is a good one, Todd. I've got an account in Deuteronomy that says, one thing, like the people went to Moses and said, we want spies, let's send spies. I got an account in Numbers that says, the Lord said unto Moses, send spies. So the Samaritan Pentateuch, this is a lot of times you'll see this in the Samaritan Pentateuch. Whoever that scribe is says, I can't leave these problems without fixing them. So I'm going to sharpen my quill, and I'm going to pull out the old ink bottle, and I'm going to say, I'm going to combine these two stories into one. And that's what they do. Quite often, the Samaritan Pentateuch is what we would call, it's a peacemaker. It makes peace between the various documents that we have, the various sources. By the way, a lot of people who have been exposed to some of these difficulties in the text of the Pentateuch and the Hebrew Bible have told me, yeah, but Ross, you got to turn to the Samaritan Pentateuch. It's the oldest. Like, I haven't looked into this. Well, the Samaritan Pentateuch happens to be, it gives away more of these additions, subtractions than anything in some cases, because they're trying to make it make sense. They're trying to iron out any discrepancies. We see hundreds of these cases. So all of that to say, this is the most rewarding and fascinating and interesting study. It takes courage. It takes confidence that God is going to ultimately lead us to truth if we trust, if we look, if we study, if we seek. And I think that's the key for me. It's like every day when I open the text and when I pray, it's about, how do I make sense of this text, learn it, and learn to live what it is that God wants us to live. And I think that's the message of Numbers chapter 15, 37 through 41. It's a priestly text, clearly, that you're to wear these fringes. This is the writer, the priestly writer, so that you look at this and you remember and your eyes don't go wandering about. I think the message of these ancient writers is, watch for God's commands and do them. It's like the Deuteronomy, listen, learn, guard, and do. Listen, but learn it, guard it, and do it. We're all on a quest, and I find it fascinating, and I hope that others do as well. Todd, I took the ball and I ran with it and got us off track a little bit. Bring us back.
Well, it's kind of funny that back when we were still in church, we were even doing the parallels, like what you're talking about, but we just didn't see it like that. We're just kind of like, it says this here, but it says this here, and they're saying the same thing, but they're not quite the same thing. And I would bring it up to the preacher back, because we would talk to him a lot just by ourselves. We were like his teacher's pets, because we're the only ones in the church that actually read anything. Yeah. Instead of sitting there being spoon-fed. And whenever I would bring up, but it says that here and this here, he would just go, well, you got to read those in context. Yeah. And one of the last times he said that to me, I looked at him and said, is that really all you've got? Yeah. Is that what they teach you in seminary? You're reading it out of context. That way it gives you the scapegoat to get out of the conversation. Yeah. He didn't appreciate that too much, but I was being serious about it. So I'm like, dude, I came to you with the question. You can't give me an answer.
Yep.
And so, you know, and that's when he starts saying, well, it's a slippery slope. You're going down. Oh, gosh, here's a slippery slope thing again.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a cop-out for every preacher. That's a slippery slope, and he just walks away from it. But, yeah, so we were doing a lot of that paralleling, too. We just, like I said, we just didn't know what it was. You know, we didn't realize that's what we were doing. But it has been interesting to find the discrepancies and stuff, but that actually has been drawing us closer to what's, you know, to what to learn.
Yeah.
We've also been questioning for what last several years as far as, you know, who is Yeshua in reality? Instead of what's written in New Testament, who is he really? And you have to be willing to take doctrine that you've learned your whole life and just start from scratch.
Yeah. That's
the only way to really learn who he is, and it's really opened our eyes. We have a YouTube channel that is a devotional channel too and everything, but we haven't done nothing in probably a year and a half because everything just started opening up for us. We started learning anything, and we're kind of like, let's chill out on this until we really figure out what's going on before we get back into doing more videos, because we were actually doing a whole series of the 613 commandments.
Yeah.
And I think we got to 300 and something, and that's when we started realizing, hey, a lot of these don't sound like him.
Yeah.
So let's stop this, and I think we're going to be deleting those off the channel. And it's just like this because something just doesn't sit right. I mean, we're doing the whole Rambam thing and all that kind of stuff, which I used to do the Rambam and all that.
Yeah.
But regardless, it was still, you know, we got to that point and we're just like, hold on. This is not lining up to who we think, you know, Jehovah is. All these sacrifices and this heifer and this goat and this, that's getting complicated.
Yeah.
And we just don't see him as complicated. He says his yoke is light.
You and Angel seem to be very sensible in your approach, and it's different than mine in that when I saw differences, when you saw differences, you said, hang on, let's get our stuff together and think about this. And somebody like me says, hey, I'm just going to air it out. I'm not sure which one is better, actually. I think I think one thing is true from my perspective is that I respect what you've done in that you want to make sure that you get a pretty good handle on it. I'm not trying to put into your mind but it sounds like that's what you're saying. Let me get this straight, and then I'll start videos again.
Yeah. And
I had something similar happen, and it wasn't really a crisis of faith. It was a crossroads. When I started realizing kind of what you're describing, I said, okay, I can read. I can see these accounts are different. And so what I've got to do is I don't have very many options here. One option is that I can just say, whoa, I'm out, I'm done. Or I can say, hey, look, I'm going to show you what I've found here. And I think there's good reason to do both, I guess is what I'm saying. And I can understand doing either or. But I've had people who've reached out to me and said, why would you show people these difficulties why are you doing that? Just stop. Stop. You're wrecking people's lives. You're messing up their faith, which is not my intention. But my intention is to be very honest as we work through these things, and I hope people know that my intentions are sincere. I really want to arrive at what is the truth of these things. So some of the things that I've worked on recently that I don't really just come out and teach straight out of, but a very interesting book and one that I highly recommend is Emmanuel Tove, his book on textual criticism of the Hebrew Bible. And because it gives us all of these interesting things. We're learning about the text. What do we know about the Bible in its earliest forms. And you're an example of, I think we probably have several who have arrived at this place similarly. And so we're all kind of in, like it or not, we're kind of all in the same boat, I think. And I like it. I mean, I might be the only one, but I'm kind of enjoying the ride.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And the funny thing is, you know, we're all at this crossroads where we're trying to figure everything out and get the truth to everything. But unfortunately, we all have access to the same materials.
Yeah.
And all you can do is go by the materials you have, and then just wonder, so is that what it says, or is that what's added in? Without the original writings, we have no clue. So
Yeah.
we're all in the same boat. You know,
Yeah,
so
and there is a method that we can follow. A lot of times we can see how a certain reading came in, how and even trace back to an authentic reading. We can see sometimes a Dead Sea Scroll reading will not agree with a reading in the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible. And we can sometimes see a clear path between point A and point B. One of those examples is in Werthstein's book, and I won't go into all of that right now, but the text of the Old Testament, Werthwein, I mean, and he gives a few examples where you're like, wow, okay, so the Septuagint reads one way, the Dead Sea Scrolls read another. How will we ever sort this out? And there is a method to it quite often where we can see how a certain text gets off. And thankfully, we're able through scholarship to figure some of that out. Sometimes a Dead Sea Scroll reading will finally make sense of something that hasn't made sense in the Masoretic text. You know, but see, my mistake early on in the journey was believing that my Hebrew Bible was perfect in every way, and I later found out that it just wasn't the case. And
right.
And I think that was, in some ways, it troubled me. Like I had to take a deep breath and say, okay. And then I got my composure and I said, all right, it is what it is. Now let's work forward. Let's see what we can figure out here. Yeah. It's fascinating. It really is a fascinating journey.
It is, yeah. Definitely is. It's also a confusing one.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But you know, and people might say, well, confusion comes from the devil. Well, I'm not the devil, believe it or not. And I think that we've inherited the text that we have, and it becomes our responsibility to look at these things. I think you mentioned, I remember years ago reading the New Testament. I typed an old man's version of the New Testament. I told that story before, but I remember years ago reading footnotes in good study Bibles, like 1 John 5:7. I think you mentioned, Todd. You know, there are three that bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Spirit, and the, you know, whatever. And these three are one. And you're like, but that, and then the footnote would say, this is not in our oldest manuscript. So I remember thinking, what does that mean? What do you mean it's not in the oldest manuscripts? What is in the oldest manuscripts? And I think that was maybe being trained all the way back that many years ago to think, okay, well, what are we looking for here then? For me, part of it was I was looking for that oldest manuscripts.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Now that doesn't, I almost said this, it doesn't mean that oldest is always the most accurate or the best. Like if we have a manuscript that's 1,000 years old and we have one that's 1,100 years old, the 1,000-year-old and the 1,100-year-old, let's say, read differently. I don't have to say that the older is better, because there may be a 2,000-year-old manuscript that reads differently still. So which one? Mm-hmm. But we have to look at all of these ancient manuscripts and make good, sound decisions. I think that's the key.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's as far as what we're trying to do basically is, people will say, well, you can't pick and choose, but we're actually, in a way, putting our own, if you want to call it, Bible together.
Yeah.
And it's not really in a booklet form. It's just like I've got the Masoretic text, which to me is, maybe you think this way too, is probably the closest that you can get as far as how things were originally worded. And then, of course, as far as the New Testament, we're just basic collections of some of the Gospels, the letters of Peter, James, all them wrote. As far as the Apocrypha, we got a separate book for that, a separate book for Jubilees, we've got a separate book for Enoch, and all that kind of stuff. And it's rather than having it all in one book, because then you got to deal with the other stuff that doesn't, I guess I wouldn't say qualify, but doesn't pass the test.
Yeah.
We've studied Jasher, and a lot of that didn't pass as far as trying to line things up. It does open your eyes to some things, but it doesn't really pass the test. So it didn't make it in art as far as what we want, in a copy. But I guess we are just picking and choosing what we want to believe or whatever. But really, it's not. It's just we're just trying to get stuff that's as truthful as we could find, so we have something to go by. And that's really all it is.
You guys are some of my favorite people. Y'all seem like you're pretty cool. It sounds like stuff I like to do.
We're hip.
I mean, yeah, that's right. But I really, that's the whole thing. Is it really is a quest. It's I think that was the awakening for me, is that you're not going to find a church or a synagogue or a branch of Judaism or Christianity that's got it all figured out. I thought about starting different groups all along the way, where I said, come join me. I'm making this up, but come join me, the pastor of the Essene, whatever. There were different things. I thought, well, what do I call myself? How do I bring other people who are where I am? Well, if I waited a week, I'd be in another place. So finally I said,
yeah.
What if we just took people on the journey and said, hey, come on, let's look at these things. Let's explore these things. Let's be honest. Let's share with people when we find textual difficulties. And look, I really felt like years ago that I had mastered the Bible, and I could show you how the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament and the types and shadows have all this stuff. And I know many of you guys have been there as well, probably. And then when problems were introduced, I said, I've got to go back to ground zero. I've got to start all the way over with this.
Yeah.
And I think what I have found refreshing, and I'm not under the impression that many people agree with me 100%. I'd be foolish to think that. But I tell you what I found is right now, every Saturday morning, we have quite a few people who say, I'm going to join that group and discuss. And they don't. I think that's part of the beauty in what we're doing here, is we're not giving you a list of articles of faith you have to sign up for. We're saying, hey, let's talk about some cool stuff in the ancient text that we have before us, and let's try to work through it. And that's what's so thrilling to me, is that so many are willing to discuss these things.
Yeah, well, it's a very small group too. It's like they say, many are called, few are chosen.
Yeah.
It's just you got to be willing to put everything aside that you've learned your whole entire life and just start from scratch.
Yeah.
And you'll find some of it is what you've had all your life, and a lot of it is not.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to keep your eyes open for that.
That's right. Well, I'll tell you, it is, in my opinion, it's one of the most fun. I don't know of anything that's more fun. So if
we enjoy
anyone,
it.
Huh? Do what?
We enjoy it. Yeah.
That's right. I do too. I'm glad you're with us. And
glad to be here.
anything else?
See it. Until next week.
I'm going to throw this out. A last call. If anyone has any comments, questions, anything else you want to share? All right. look, this week, we're going to be working here locally to put out a few more things. One of the things that I'm really going to be shifting gears towards is we're moving. We're moving to a new place, and so we're doing some work there. We're doing some work here. It's really kind of burning the candle at both ends for us, but so keep us in your prayers if you would. We appreciate that. And you know, it's a lot going on, but thank God that Seth is now helping, because for years, you know, I had to do this and didn't have anybody local helping. I had Dave and Sherry, good friends of mine, and I've had others that have come along the way. We have John and Lyndon. But in terms of actually working on producing these videos right now, Seth's help has been tremendous. I know you saw the video this morning. Those kind of things, I think, help us to illustrate and demonstrate. And so I'm thrilled that he's on board. So, and also he's going to be helping me move too. So that makes it better. So, hey, have a beautiful week, everyone. Don't let anything get you down if you can help it. Keep your chin up. Be happy. Be blessed. And join us next week. You'll see a newsletter coming out Thursday with our next plan. And we'll let you know what's going on. And we'll post pictures every now and then of what it looks like. By the way, I'm going to put their names in a newsletter, but the local prison had some members, had some prisoners, I guess they're members, who had, they had to do a certain amount of community service. And so they volunteered them, I'm sure they didn't volunteer, but they volunteered them to come into the building and help, and thank God for these guys. They came in and they painted and they prepared the wall and they laid the floor. And so I asked the guy, because I was busy doing other stuff when I heard that they had already come, I said, I need their names because I want to go thank them. So so I'm going to try to go visit these guys, and I don't know, bring them, you know, if not that any of you would ever know this, because you probably never done anything wrong and got put in jail. But I hear that, you know, sometimes if you get arrested and you're in the jail, you get, somebody can give you some money to buy candy bars or something. So I'm telling you, I'm going to give these guys a little money for their kitty because they did a good job for us. And so I don't know their names. I don't have them in front of me, but I hope they wouldn't mind. I just want to say, keep those guys in your prayers, because they really did a good deed. Whether they know it was for me or not, I can't wait to meet them and tell them thank you. So it's a joint effort. It's a community effort. And hopefully these guys will get out and they can come sit with me and we can talk about the Bible when they get out. And appreciate y'all. Have a beautiful week. Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Blessings to all of you. Later.